Hello and welcome to the Education Connections webinar, Dropouts, Dreamers, and Alternative Pathways to College with Dr. Marguerite Lukes. My name is Sarah Moore and I am the Project Director of Education Connections, an initiative of the Center for Applied Linguistics in collaboration with the University of Oregon. Today we will meet for 1 hour and end promptly at 1 p.m. Eastern Time. We are pleased today to be joined by Dr. Marguerite Lukes, who has been an educator and advocate for immigrant students, emergent bilinguals, and English language learners for more than 25 years. Currently at International's Network for Public Schools, Marguerite is the Director of National Initiatives, overseeing a 5-year federally funded school reform initiative to promote higher levels of achievement for English language learners. Today, Dr. Lukes will be presenting on a topic that she explores in more detail in her new book, Latino Immigrant Youth and Interrupted Schooling, Dropouts, Dreamers, and Alternative Pathways to College. We will post a link to her book in the chat box if you'd like to read more. We are delighted to have Dr. Lukes with us today. We'll begin today's session with a brief introduction and overview of Education Connections. Next, we'll hear from Dr. Lukes. Following her presentation, we'll have some time reserved for questions and comments from participants. We'll be monitoring questions as they come in, and we encourage you to send along any thoughts or questions that come to mind during the presentation using the questions box in the GoToWebinar window. During today's session, we'll also be posting some polling questions related to both your background and today's topic. Once results are in, we'll post them for you to view. At the end of the Q&A, we'll wrap up by briefly highlighting the Education Connections monthly lesson planning competition, which is currently underway for the month of April. We also invite you to join Education Connections via the link on your screen to access additional resources on standards-based instruction for English language learners and to enter this month's lesson planning competition, in which winners receive $100. For those of you who may be new to Education Connections, we wanted to briefly introduce you to the community and resources available. Education Connections is a free online community that provides access to a wide range of resources and brings educators together to collaborate around implementing high-quality standards-based instruction with all students, and especially English learner and emergent bilingual students. It is an initiative of the Center for Applied Linguistics and is hosted on the University of Oregon's Oberverse platform. Education Connections provides professional learning communities, resources, webinars, and lesson planning tools, as well as a monthly lesson planning competition. Anyone is welcome to join, so we invite you to sign up today if you're not already a member. In connection with today's webinar, the publisher of Dr. Lukes' new book is offering a 30% discount on both the hard copy and ebook. If you'd like to take advantage of this offer, simply enter the discount code LUKES30 when you're checking out on Multilingual Matters website. We'll post the link to the book in the chat box within GoToWebinar, and the link is also available on Education Connections. As a reminder, the Education Connections team will be posting a video archive of the webinar, a PDF of the PowerPoint, and links to resources related to today's webinar. To access these resources, log on to Education Connections and click on the Webinars tab. On your screen, you'll see a polling question about what level you teach. We'll post these results as they come in. So our results are still coming in, and it looks like 27% middle, 14% high, 9% post-secondary. Well, that's really interesting to have a lot of post-secondary folks joining us. And then 50% NA, so those may be folks who are sort of generally involved in administration or professional development, preparation, things of that nature. Great. Well, it's wonderful to have everyone joining us today, and we'll now turn the session over to Marguerite.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, Sarah, and colleagues and everyone at the Center for Applied Linguistics and Ed Connections. Thank you for inviting me. Really happy to be here. Wonderful. So you can see my screen, I hope, fiddling with the technology. So I'll be talking for a little while, and we're going to do our best, as Sarah shared, with the polling to make this as interactive as we can via the webinar format. Let me move forward. So I come to this work as a practitioner and also as a researcher, and what's driven a great deal of my work over the past couple of decades has been addressing not only a gap in services, but also a gap in research and scholarship on immigrant youth and adults and on English language learners. One of my experiences have been that a lot of what we read in the literature is sometimes not completely aligned to what we see out in the community and what we see in schools. So I'll be talking about that in more depth throughout the webinar. But for now, we're going to go to another poll. The poll is open. Is that something that's going to, is that going to come up on the screen?
Yes, we'll post the results in a minute after some more people have responded.
Okay. So okay.
So there you should be able to see the results now.
Okay, I do not, but okay.
So what we've seen in these poll results is we see that in terms of the kinds of support that attendees are providing for ELs at their school, there's 33% that said they provide counseling, 43% said sheltered instruction, 38% self-contained ESL, 43% push-in or pull-out ESL, and 10% native language content classes. So relatively evenly mixed across, except a lot fewer with native language content classes.
Okay, super. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. And thank you, everyone, for responding. So what we're going to focus on today in the webinar are really four main areas. In focusing on adolescent newcomer ELLs, what do we need to know about them to serve them well? And then what do we miss when we look at students who've interrupted their schooling or might be categorized as dropouts? What do we miss when we look at them simply as students who've abandoned school or who have gaps in their schooling? Also, what promising models exist to serve newcomer ELLs and to address their array of needs, and how do we best design services for them? Okay. So we're going to challenge ourselves now to look a little bit closer. Right now we're going to be looking at a population that's often overlooked, youth who come into high school settings and who arrive as teens and young adults between 16 and 24 with interrupted schooling. So I'm going to start with talking about what I know. My experience, my school history looked pretty much like this. Kindergarten, elementary school, middle school, went on to high school. It was simple, it was seamless, it was straightforward. I graduated without a lot of bumps along the road and certainly with no interruptions. But for some newcomers who we find in our schools, it looked a little bit more like this. They start schooling, and then there's an interruption in schooling because of economic necessity and a need to work. And then, sadly, another interruption due to migration, a path that I would say is not so much a choice, but more a predetermined pathway in terms of moving to the U.S., seeking work, responding, fleeing violence. We're seeing this a lot more frequently now with unaccompanied minors who are arriving into our schools. And then after arriving in the U.S., the necessity of working, often in low-paying jobs. So this is a reality of a young man who participated in my research, Ramon. And then here's another young woman who also had a not-so-linear trajectory, went to school, went to middle school, and then before she was able to graduate high school, came to reunite with family members in the U.S. and then after arriving ended up also working to contribute to the family. So these young people are really officially categorized as dropouts. And what do we know about them? What do the numbers actually say about students who fit into this category? We know that in comparing native-born and foreign-born populations, there are many more foreign-born who have incomplete high school, and these numbers are increasing all the time. And this has implications for the economy, for full participation in society. In the last decade, we know also that although overall educational attainment in the U.S. has risen, there are more and more immigrants over the age of 25 who have incomplete high school. So the numbers, when you look a little more closely, you can differentiate. And for young people like Ramon and Altagracia, who I introduced here, who arrive in their teen years with interrupted schooling, there are a lot of other things that are important to know about them. They may come from high poverty backgrounds. They're working. They might be working part-time. They may be working as much as full-time in primarily low-paying sectors. They have adult economic responsibilities for family, sometimes family who are here contributing to the family, and also sending money back home to support family who have been left behind. In addition, something we often overlook, they come with social, emotional, and mental health needs. They've experienced sometimes trauma on their way, making their way to the U.S. They have needs adjusting to their new environment, so they have needs in that area. They also come from diverse ethnic and linguistic backgrounds, an array of literacy backgrounds, and they have an array of years in school, ranging from sometimes no time in school, depending on where they've come from, or maybe have almost completed high school before interrupting their schooling. So their multiple needs are intertwined and complex, but really social needs, emotional needs, family support needs. There's also the factor of reuniting with family members or coming to meet family members that maybe they never had met before when they arrive in the U.S. Academic needs, linguistic, workforce needs, navigating a new context, integrating into both the school community and into their new community in the U.S. And also this, David Connolly talks about something called contextual knowledge. So really understanding when they're integrating into an educational pathway, what is it, what are the opportunities for me in schooling, what's out there, what's going to best serve me. And then the area of social capital, who's my network, who can support me, who are my peers, how can I leverage my network to access services and access opportunities to advance and to develop. Let's go back to Ramon, who I introduced earlier. So we see his pathway up to working, but what do we know about where Ramon goes after work, or what opportunities there are for someone like him who is working? Can he participate in a traditional high school setting because of his working hours, and or is he taking part in other educational opportunities? We know that the majority of the immigrant population growth that's projected in the future is going to be among adults and young adults with interrupted education. So how do we serve these young people? And as I mentioned earlier, what we've seen in recent migration trends is really a spike in youth with interrupted schooling and in unaccompanied minors. So how do we serve these young people, and what opportunities can we provide for them? How we view them is very important in how we serve them. Are we looking at our newcomer ELLs as students who are deficient in some way, who are a glass half empty, or are we looking at them as resources and with strengths as really a glass half full? And who are they? Who are these adolescent ELLs? In terms of their academic skills, we may miss the diversity. Some of them come with oral English proficiency. Some of them come with strong content knowledge, strong academic background, while some might have content knowledge gaps. And they may or may not have emergent literacy in English and or in their home language. So their academic needs are extremely diverse. Often we equate academic needs or emergent skills with overall deficiencies, but in the end, we have the opportunity really to recognize adolescent ELLs as resourceful, resilient, creative. There are all these positive elements of them as young people that they bring into the school environment. In addition, they are adolescents. They're intimidated by their new context. They may be unsure, not just the same as adolescents in any context. They're in need of encouragement. They may be missing home. They're struggling to adapt. They're idealistic about their futures. And most importantly, they're young people that are going through major developmental changes. Sometimes we may see young people who seem older than their years because of the experiences they've had and because of the adult responsibilities they have, but they're going through major developmental changes, and we have to keep in mind that they are adolescents. And what happens to them when they try to enroll in traditional high school settings? And this is where I'm going to speak a little bit about my research. I was involved for many years in the adult education system in New York City, working with publicly funded and also community-based programs, and I began to see in many programs a rise in the number of young adults participating in ESL and in GED programs, and then I would read in the research about the disinterest of this population in schooling, and I thought, it doesn't make a lot of sense. I'm seeing these kids getting up in the morning, going to GED classes, and they're not in high school, even though they're young kids. And I set out and I conducted some research with about 200 young people who were participating in adult ed but who were still of high school age. And what I found was basically three categories of young people. Obviously, they were a self-selecting group because they were very interested in participating in education, but they were not in traditional high schools because of having a somewhat untraditional pathway and an unconventional pathway, and arriving at schools overage and undercredited, and schools kind of seeing themselves as not having the services for them. So one of the groups is push-outs, and these are students who had come and, like Altagracia, had enrolled in high school right away, but then were discharged from school or were encouraged to leave. And sadly, this is something that we see in schools sometime, and this is a quote from Altagracia, who said she was told basically, if you don't leave school, we're going to have to discharge you, you're a little old and you're not going to graduate. And she was concerned because she felt like she was kind of compelled to leave school. And again, I'm not placing the blame on anyone here. I'm just sharing this story. But she shared, it's not like you want to drop out of school. She felt somewhat that she'd been kind of edged out of her participation in school. Another group of students that I encountered is a group that I refer to as shutouts, which is a term that I coined, which is students that tried or intended to enroll in high school when they arrived, but they were either told by family members or peers, no, you're too old, or you don't have the right papers, or you're not going to be able to enroll, or you don't even try to go to high school. Even though, at least in New York State, we know that students are eligible until they're 21 to participate in high school. And again, these are two quotes from students with whom I spoke with in my study. And this is, I would share one more group of students a group that I refer to as holdouts, and these are students who are labor migrants who arrive, like Ramon, and go straight to work. And what I found among these young people is that after a couple of years, they either met someone who was enrolled in college or someone who was in a high school equivalency program and said to themselves, hey, I don't want to be like, I don't want to be 40 years old wandering around trying to find another job. I'm going to have to keep starting over. Every time I leave my job, I start from the bottom. This education thing, maybe I do have access to that. So they kind of embraced the American dream ideal of education, getting you a place, giving you the opportunity to move ahead. And here's a quote from a young man who said, you know, it doesn't matter if I'm undocumented, it doesn't matter what my status is. I'm going to get an education and things are not going to be the same for me. So really made the decision to invest in himself. So, and what I saw across the board among these young people is, you know, a real idealism around education is going to help me, it's going to get me where I need to be, I want to improve myself, I want to work hard. But schools face a challenge. Are there actually incentives for schools to serve these young people? So if a student arrives at your door who is 17 or 18 and has beginning levels of English, maybe emergent literacy skills, what do you do if you're being, as a school, if you're being penalized for this student potentially not graduating in 4 years? So the reality is, we know, you know, I'm not trying to suggest that we don't need an accountability system. Obviously, we need accountability for schools, but there's so much pressure on schools to raise the achievement of students and to increase graduation rates or face sanctions that many students have been referred out to adult education programs or have just been referred out altogether and have found no pathway to continue their education. So I'm going to now shift to a question. I've introduced all these additional areas that we need to think about in addition to academic support for students. What kind of additional supports are available in your school for newcomer ELLs? And this is an open-ended question, and I should remind you that you just type your response into the box, into the questions box. So I'm going to wait. I don't see the poll coming up.
Yeah, so the poll won't show up. It's just this slide, and then any responses that folks have, you can just type them in as a question.
So people have, so there's a, yeah, so you can type, there's a, you have your chat box there, and you should just type in. Thank you for clarifying that. So again, I'm not seeing responses.
Okay, great. So we are seeing them on our end. So I'm just going to sort of run through a few of the additional supports that we're seeing: health services, homework help, additional intensive language instruction, after-school programs, newcomer center, K through 10, partnering with native speakers. Here we have an advisory program for newcomers and a newcomers class that meets once a week. Others say parent liaisons. We have a high intensity, that one is the one I already mentioned, language program. There's another mention of a newcomer academy, reunification program. Another mentions tutors, and a newcomer center, and professional development for teachers. Then we have out-of-time programs, and finally, looks like recently credit validation is the most recent. So,
super, super, excellent. Thank you, everyone, for sharing those. Thank you. So you all have mentioned an array of services that I think fall into these categories. So you talked about health services and some mental health services, language development services, native language development, but also English enrichment classes, literacy, skills, academic support. The area that I've listed here, identity and social mirroring. Schools and programs, to be effective, have to address the whole area of integration. Students integrating not only, you know, the awkwardness and the developmental issues in adolescence, but students who are immigrants integrating into a new context that may be very, very different from their own and may seem hostile. And then the whole issue of accountability, pressures, and reporting. I'm going to mention briefly two elements that I touched on earlier. One is the whole area of social capital and the value of peers, the importance of peers in adolescence. What I found in among the young people that I worked with in my research is that many did not know anyone who was involved in education, who was working towards high school equivalency or was thinking about college, and some of them even said, I don't have anyone to advise me about education. Or, you know, in their work context, they were around people who were not in school. So, and they all spoke about the importance of being in a network of people or the influence of just that one person who was on an educational trajectory or who had this connections to a school or a program and how that really changed their life. Another piece is academic skills. I've mentioned the issue of interrupted schooling. Often we overlook looking at students' skills in their home language, and I would like to suggest that we can sometimes very easily give students an assessment in their home language just to see, do they have literacy skills, to ask them some questions, find out about their educational background to really be able to address the whole picture of their academic skills in the native language in addition to in English. We also have to keep in mind that students might not always know what all of the educational opportunities or options are out there, and because often they're gaining their information from friends and family members. Those are our primary sources, and those people might be somewhat disconnected from educational services and support services. And in addition, both hard academic skills but also soft skills are really key in designing educational programs, and I've mentioned all these things before. Okay, I'm going to jump ahead. So in designing programs, I want to pose some questions, then I'm going to talk a little bit about our network of schools. How do our programs, by design, leverage and build on the strengths that students bring? And do we even recognize the strengths that our newcomer English learners bring? How do they address potential gaps in students' home language and skills? And how are we actually building, in addition to academic skills, knowledge of educational options, career path options, post-secondary options? How do we help students build a network of support and really draw both of adults within the school but also within the community? And how do we create opportunities for students to interact with peers who have similar backgrounds and really find others who are like them who have continued their education so they can actually recognize, oh look, there's somebody like me who has continued their education. How do we partner with post-secondary programs as a bridge to college, keeping in mind that students might not be familiar at all with post-secondary options or might be first-generation college students? And how do we address students' social emotional needs? So I am going to talk a little bit about the Internationals Network for Public Schools, which is about to celebrate its 10th anniversary, but has, as schools go, has been around for 30 years. our schools. There's a little timeline, which once the PowerPoint is up, I'll invite you to read all the details of the timeline. But the first school was launched in 1985 as a partnership between LaGuardia Community College and the New York City Department of Education. And we have high schools in New York City, in California, Virginia, and Washington, D.C., our network. And our students come from all over the globe and speak over 100 languages. And our graduation rates are quite good. As we know, English language learners often graduate at rates below that of the general school population, but in both 4- and 6-year graduation rates, the Internationals Network has a history of success. Key to internationals are 5 core principles. The first one is heterogeneity. So students are not tracked. They're actually placed together in a classroom, students of different levels of English proficiency, different academic backgrounds, mixed gender, mixed everything, heterogeneous groups. The focus is also on experiential learning, project-based learning. So students learn by doing. They work on projects that incorporate both language development and academic content, which is our third principle. Content and language are taught together. We know that in order to be successful, students need to learn the academic language of the discipline that they're engaging in the classroom, and English language development is addressed in all classes. Our schools also have what we call localized autonomy and authority. So students work as teams and decision makers, as do teachers, as does our whole network of schools. And we have one learning model for all. So teachers learn and administrators learn the way students learn as a team and together. So here's some of the key ideas of our approach, which I just mentioned. Students are always working in small groups. Teachers work as an interdisciplinary team, which is very different from a traditional high school approach where teachers tend to be isolated in their classroom and in their disciplinary department. In Internationals Network schools, teachers actually work both across departments and across disciplines. So a team of 5 teachers will share a cohort of students. So the same students see the same teachers, and this allows something very important to happen for language development. Teachers can reinforce the ideas, routines, academic language from class to class as they're sharing students. They can plan together, they can create thematic units, they can create interdisciplinary units, and they're able to also address students' social emotional needs because they can talk to each other about their cohort of students. Teachers work very hard, but it makes supporting the student much more seamless. Another key to the work that we do is that students' native languages are used as resources, and they're able to make sense of complex content, leveraging their native language with the goal of producing work in English. So just a reminder that English language learners have a triple load, not just a double load, but a triple load. They're learning English, they're learning content, and they're also developing on a social emotional level. And all of those 3 things are very important when we're working with adolescent ELLs. Young teens and adolescents are all of these things. They're impressionable, they're insecure, they're self-centered. They're also curious. They're quick to give up, so they need validation, they need positive feedback, they need to see themselves progressing, and they're always seeking validation. If we have a teacher-centered approach, what we've seen and what research has shown is that students get called on less frequently, students don't problem solve as much, they get criticized more than they're praised. And this is really the bad for the development of ELLs because they're not getting the opportunity to speak, they're not getting the opportunity to problem solve, and they're not getting the opportunity to use their language. What we see in a typically teacher-centered classroom, if the teacher is at the center and calls on each student individually, a student will get maybe 1 minute at most in class to speak. But if we have students working collaboratively in groups and helping each other, there can be student talk and student problem solving going on at all levels, accessible to all students all the time during the class. The optimal learning conditions for ELLs, we want a classroom that is low anxiety, not where I'm always being told that I'm wrong, but where I'm being challenged to improve, but also encouraged to recognize my own development. As we know, we need comprehensible input. We need a focus on communication and producing language orally and in writing. We need language that's contextualized. We need to accept students' errors and respect for language acquisition stages. And most importantly, viewing students as assets. So when we look at classrooms in the Internationals Network schools, they look quite different. We see a lot of writing all the time. Students are writing reflections, students are writing their ideas, they're writing to each other, they're writing exit slips, they're writing do-nows, there's writing all the time. And often low-stakes writing, but low-stakes writing promotes fluency. We see students doing oral reports. The first oral reports might be in a whisper, but then as students continue their frequency to have to present to their peers, we see much more fluency and much more confidence. And this is really key to their development as English learners, having the opportunities to actually speak and to be cheered on by their heterogeneous group of classmates. We see cooperative groups, we see peer feedback, we see students engaged in problem solving with each other all the time. We see peer supports. You will often see students, if students are paired with a partner of the same language background, you might see students working on very complex content, helping each other in their native language, but writing in English, and you just think about the cognitive complexity that's going on. But they're helping each other, they're learning from each other, they're supporting each other. You see students involved in hands-on work, experiential learning, doing, seeing. And if you think about the accessibility of actually doing a project as a newcomer ELL with emergent levels of English, this makes the content accessible, learning by doing, and then being able to observe and write about and problem solve about what you've learned. I mentioned this before, student talk outweighs teacher talk, the opportunity to actually produce language. And finally, students use not only English, but also their native language in ways that are dynamic, creative, communicative, and promote learning and meaning making. So going to our final poll, key, and I want to reinforce this, key in our schools is that everyone in the school is responsible for meeting the needs of ELLs. And think about your school and the way your school is structured, because this is key. Who is responsible for meeting the needs of ELLs at your school? Who is either assigned to that job? So I'm going to give people a chance to write in the chat box.
Okay, so we have some responses coming in. The ESL teacher is the person responsible. Someone says all staff, and again, everyone, the teachers who serve them and the campus district administrators, the ELL coordinator, as well as individual teachers, classroom teachers, an ESL, everyone from administrators to teachers, the ESL teacher and the classroom teacher, as well as special education if applicable. And then we have teachers and intervention specialists. Often it's seen as the ESL teacher's responsibility, but we're hoping that may be changing, someone says. So lots of different ideas about whose responsibility.
Okay, super. No, that sounds very promising. And I want to reiterate too. Thank you for all of your responses to that question. I want to reiterate that in order for it to be everyone's responsibility, it's both an attitude and a decision of the folks in the school, but it's also a structural element. So in order for folks to be responsible for ELLs needs, it has to do with how the school is set up, who's interacting with them, how those folks are afforded the opportunity to meet together and talk together to really meet students' needs as a team. And then just to kind of sum it up, I would suggest that to create effective and alternative settings for students, for ELLs at the middle and high school level to move on and to move on to post-secondary education and career, is that there is this shared responsibility in a team-based approach, and that the curriculum that we design, that we offer, really does address this triple whammy of academic content, language development, and social emotional support, and that the collaboration happens on an interdisciplinary level, which is also a structural element, so that faculty can team together to attend to students' needs, that learning is project-based and experiential, and that students' home languages are leveraged in addition to English. And we've come to the end, and I think I'm on time, and that there's time for some Q&A that Sarah's going to help us facilitate.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Marguerite, for your time and today's presentation. We've had a couple questions, so we do want to route people back who are interested in further information to your book published by Multilingual Matters. And at this point, we will switch the screen back over. Here we are.
Okie dokie.
So now we will take a few minutes for questions and answers. Just type those in your chat box or your question box via GoToWebinar, and we will sort of share them with Marguerite and look forward to some rich discussion. So let's see, our first question, what is the role of school leaders in promoting and sustaining improved services for English learners and emergent bilingual students? Do you want to speak to that, Marguerite? Any thoughts?
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I mean, the school leader has an unenviable and very important job, and I think one of there's a couple of key functions, and one of them is really setting the tone at the school that encourages risk-taking and growth, which is going to be then embodied among teachers who are going to try out new things and be able to work in creative ways that I've talked about in my presentation, and that's going to then trickle down to students. I think especially at the high school level, where we have traditionally a model that's very much, my classroom and my discipline, it does take a lot of risk-taking and time and support as a teacher to be able to work across disciplines and partner with other teachers. So for a school leader, that means creating substructures within the school where teachers can work together and can talk together, giving people opportunities for professional development, giving them feedback that's not on a gotcha kind of perspective of, this is everything you're doing wrong, but that really encourages growth and to provide all faculty within the school and all staff in the school with the mission of serving all the students in the school, ELLs and non-ELLs, and with opportunities for growth and to learn how best to serve students.
Great, thank you. Now we have sort of a very practical and sort of logistical question. When students work in small groups, does that include native English speakers?
It depends. I mean, in the internationals network, schools serve exclusively English language learners at the lowest levels of English proficiency, but because the students are grouped heterogeneously, there are students at all levels of English proficiency. So they're not native speakers, but they may be at more advanced levels of English. And one of the things that makes this heterogeneity really possible is, and makes it effective, is that students are at all levels. If you think about, you know, our executive director, Claire Sylvan, often asks the question, how many students do you need in a group for it not to be heterogeneous? And the answer to that is 1. Once you have 2 students, you have mixed everything. You have mixed academic levels, mixed English levels, mixed life experiences. So whether or not there are native speakers in the group, there are always students at different levels of English proficiency. But again, within the international schools, the students are all ELLs.
Great, thanks so much. So here, now let's move to sort of a broader systems question. Does the Internationals Network work closely with other U.S. school districts in helping them mirror or implement some or all of your programs?
Yes. So the first international school was in New York City, and we have a larger network of schools, numerous schools in New York City that are regular public non-charter schools within the New York City Department of Education. We have also worked with the District of Columbia Public Schools, New Haven Public Schools. We have a school in San Francisco, in Oakland. We have an academy in Arlington Public Schools. So yes, we have worked with schools and school systems across the country. We part also in Alexandria, not Arlington, my mistake, Alexandria, Virginia. The Internationals Network partners with districts to open and support schools. So in addition to providing professional development and support services, we actually form partnerships with districts to open and support schools. We don't end up running the schools. It's the school district that runs the schools because they're regular public schools with per pupil funding and so on. Did that answer the question? Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that was really valuable for sort of at the school and district level. Here's another one, sort of getting back down to sort of more practical thoughts. What do you think is the relationship between language development and students feeling like they're shutouts or holdouts? From the youth you studied, are they opting for work over school because of their struggles with language and literacy?
In my experience and in talking to students, I guess I would respectfully challenge the notion of the opting as really a choice, because students are in a position that if they've come here, you know, in a kind of trafficking situation or using a coyote if they're coming from Latin America, they often have debts to repay of getting to the U.S. They often have to support family who are left behind in their country of origin. They're often contributing to the family. So I think the opting for work is more an obligation and a necessity of having to work in order to meet real needs. It's not, you know, some spending money to go to the movies. It's my family's got to eat here, and I'm working so that I can contribute or so I can pay rent. I think the language and literacy issues, I mean, for students, students are in a bind if they're working and their schedule doesn't permit them to attend school, because schools are usually from 8 to 2 or 8 to 3 or 9 to 3, and they're being put in this position of having to choose. I think one of the, we've been talking a lot here about how do we create an alternative context where students can go to school at night, or they can continue their schooling once they age out at 21 or 18 or whatever the cutoff age in the state is for high school. So I think language and literacy needs may make students feel like they don't belong in high school, or once they're there, in a traditional model is going to make students struggle more if those academic needs aren't being addressed. But I think the bigger issue is around how do we facilitate a context where students who are in the position of having to work can still attend school, and where we have a flexible model that enables them to participate in education, because they know, they recognize that it's going to get them to the next level, and it's going to get them where they want to go, and where's the place that's going to enable them to do that.
Great. Great. So we're just scanning these. Now here's an interesting question and certainly appropriate for today. Many of our students are undocumented. What can I tell them about opportunities after they are educated? Thoughts on that?
Well, depends on when the after starts. There are increasingly opportunities for students to participate in post-secondary education, regardless of their immigration status. We definitely, depending on when students arrive, we definitely encourage them to, if they're eligible for DACA, Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, to, seek legal assistance so they can get in the DACA pathway, which has really, for many of our students, has been very important. What else? There are, for public universities, I know New York State and a number of states have made it possible for students, regardless of their legal status, to enroll as residents in the state or municipal college system. There are scholarships increasingly, they're not, although students who are undocumented aren't eligible for Pell or for public loans or public grants to participate in education, there are increasingly scholarships and funds that make it possible. Some of our students have applied for private scholarships as well and been Gates Millennium Scholars and been Posse Scholars and gotten their college paid for. Often our students, though, need to work, and they go to college part-time, often because they might be working at not the highest wages, but they're going to college part-time. So, but we also recognize that no matter what your legal status, that in improving your educational credentials will lead to improved earnings, and that's a reality. And so it depends on the student's situation.
Great. Great, thank you. That's a tough one. So we have two more, I think, really interesting questions for the audience. The first is, if a district is interested in partnering with International's network, what steps should we take?
Contact us. That's the first step. You have all of our, I think on my slides is our contact information. I mean, contact us. We start by a conversation and talking about what the goals of partnering would be, and then talking about what's possible, and then we take it from there. It's something that's what we do. we partner with districts to open and support, not only open schools, but also support schools. So it begins with a conversation. So reach out is what I would say.
Great. Great, thanks. And then here's one final question. Where can we find more resources for welcoming newcomer students if we do not have enough students to have a full international schools program?
I would say, many of the things that I talked about today in the presentation really would fall under the category of welcoming newcomers. So not just the formal, what do I do when they walk in the door, but really taking a look at your school, from the moment that students arrived, and how you can provide professional development to folks across the school community to be able to make students feel welcome, to be able to group them in such a way so that they have a peer who can support them, so that there are multiple teachers who are responsible for addressing their needs, so that there's counseling support and guidance, and maybe partnering with community-based organizations to address some of the wraparound services that students need, legal services, housing. So it's, even if you don't have enough students, for the services that we provide as an organization, there's no need to start an entire international school to have us do professional development for you to receive support in serving your English language learners better, and we're always willing to do that. So again, begins with a conversation. But I would say the welcoming really is an across the school issue, and it starts from when students walk in the door. But also, the role of teachers and how teachers can design their curriculum in such a way so that you can actually create collaborative groups and leverage students' language and have a classroom that is much more student-centered.
Great, great. Thank you. Well, we have had lots of questions today. Not all we were able to talk about. And so if you have additional questions or thoughts and you would like to share those, we invite you to join Education Connections and go ahead and post those to our discussion forums, and we welcome rich and lively discussion around these questions, concerns, and issues. We will be posting, and I'll mention later on in our slides, the archive of this webinar. In addition, we just wanted to respond to one question about posting additional resources regarding undocumented newcomers, and so we will also post that under our Education Connections space where this archive is located. We wanted to also let you know about our next webinar in which Dr. Wayne Wright will present on the implications of policies and national trends for English learner access and student success. We will post links to this webinar in Education Connections as well as via our social media accounts closer to the date of the webinar. So we invite you to stay tuned for that information. In addition, we invite you to once again join the Education Connections Lesson Plan Competition. You can find information regarding the competition by clicking on the Lesson Planning tab within Education Connections. We host a monthly competition and each month announce a winner who receives a $100 gift card. And finally, we'd like to thank Dr. Lukes for sharing her expertise with us today, and each of you for taking the time to participate in today's session. We hope it's been helpful to you as part of your teaching practice. We'd also like to extend one final invitation to continue to connect and collaborate with us and your fellow educators on Education Connections. Feel free to reach out to our team at edconnect@cal.org with any questions you may have about the webinar or the community. Thanks again, and we hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. Thanks so much, everyone. Take care. And thank you, Marguerite.
Thank you. Thank you very much.